Today we'll be talking about food chains, food webs, and ecological pyramids. And this is the document that you'll need. As you can see, most of the information is already there for you, so you don't have to write too much down. However, everything that's highlighted in yellow like this is a question that you should be answering throughout the lesson. And there are quite a few, so as usual, just make sure you're paying attention and you don't skip any parts of the video. Part 2 I'll talk about at the end. All right, so for part 1, we'll look at what an ecological niche is, what a food chain is, a food web, trophic levels, ecological pyramids, pyramid of numbers compared to a pyramid of biomass, and effects of diets on food webs. Part 2 will be independent learning, and it'll be bioaccumulation and biomagnification, but I'll explain that after. An ecological niche is the function that a species serves in its ecosystem, including what it eats it, and how it behaves. Now, I could ask you the niche of any species, whether it's a mouse, a robin, a hawk, anything, but we'll look at the niche of a black bear as an example. So one thing the definition had in there was what the species eats. So here it says that they feed on tender plant parts such as nuts and berries. They supplement their diet with insects and other small animals as well. And then one of the functions that the black bear serves in its ecosystem is that it can carry seeds for long distances in their digestive systems before the seeds are expelled, and then they will germinate. So once the seeds are expelled from the black bear, this will produce more plants, such as the nut and berry plants that it eats. And another thing is what eats bears. So here we have at the bottom that it doesn't really have many predators other than human hunters, but they're also fed on by many blood-feeding insects and are host to parasites. And finally, we have how it behaves. As most of you know, bears go into hibernation during the winter. All right, moving on to food chains. A food chain is a sequence of organisms, each feeding on the next, showing how energy is transferred from one organism to another. In this example, we can see that the seeds of a producer, the pine cone here, is consumed by the red squirrel, which is the herbivore, and the red squirrel is consumed by the weasel, which is the carnivore, and the weasel is consumed by the hawk, which is a top carnivore. And the difference between the carnivore and the top carnivore is simply that the top carnivore is found at the top of the pyramid, and he preys on other organisms, but himself is not really preyed on by anything, except sometimes human hunters could be something that go after it. The difference between a food chain and a food web is that a food web shows a series of interconnecting food chains, so multiple food chains, and it's a representation of the feeding relationships within a community. This is an example of a food web, and we can see many things. For example, the red squirrel is eaten by or consumed by a weasel. The goshawk consumes the weasel, and what else? The great horned owl eats the red squirrel eats this pine tree here, and so on and so on. And then one thing that is important to realize is that if we were to remove one of these species, that would have a few consequences. For example, if we remove the weasel right here, that would mean that there would most likely be an increase in the population of red squirrel, because the weasel is one of the things that eats the red squirrel. He's also eaten by the great horned owl and the goshawk and the lynx, but now he has one less predator if we remove that weasel. And another thing that would happen is the goshawk here. He has one less thing to eat. So he can't eat weasels anymore, he can only eat red squirrel and snowshoe hare. So that would mean that there would probably be a decrease in the population of goshawk. The last thing we'll talk about is pyramids, and we have three types. We have the energy pyramids, number pyramids, and biomass pyramids. And what they do is they display relationships between trophic levels in ecosystems. The first one we'll talk about is energy pyramids, which illustrate the energy loss and transfer between trophic levels. And one thing you'll notice is as we go up to the higher trophic levels, the energy pyramid will always decrease in size. So these layers that we have here is what represents the energy available at that trophic level. So here we could see that at the first trophic level, we have a lot more energy available than at the second, which then has more available than the third, and the third has more available than the fourth. And that's because as one organism consumes another, it obtains both the physical matter, which is the nutrients, and also the chemical food energy it needs to survive, grow, and reproduce. However, each time we go up a level, what we see with these red lines is that about 90% of the energy is lost as heat into the environment. So it doesn't get passed on to that next level. And what that means, if we lose 90%, that means only that 10% of the energy is passed on to the next level. We can see the specific distribution of energy in this pyramid. So we start with 10,000 joules, which is 100% of our original energy, which was given to the producers by the sun. And from here, 10% of this 10,000 joules is passed on to the second trophic level. So there is now 1,000 joules at this level because 10% of 10,000 is 1,000. In other words, 10,000 divided by 10 equals 1,000 joules. And then as we go to the third trophic level, 10% of this 10% is passed on. And 10% of 10% is 1%. In other words, 1% of our original 10,000 joules is now here, which is 100 joules. So we took the 1,000 joules here and divided by 10 to have 100 joules. And then at the fourth trophic level, again, 10% is passed on from the third level to the fourth, and 10% of 1% is 0.1%. In other words, 100 joules divided by 10 became 10 joules. And that's how it works. In another example, I could give you some different numbers here. I could use 40,000 joules here, and you should be able to figure out how many joules will be at each level. But like I said, all you have to do is divide by 10. So 10,000 divided by 10, 1,000. 1,000 divided by 10 equals 100, and so on. The last two types of pyramids are the number pyramids and the biomass pyramids. This one on the left is a number pyramid, and we can see that it's the opposite of an energy pyramid. So an energy pyramid, it always decreases as it goes up because of the loss of energy. However, for the number pyramid, it just depends on the food chain. It could decrease as it goes up, or it could increase as it goes up. In this case, when we're looking at trees, crickets, and the parasite spider, we can see that the number of individuals of all populations in each trophic levels increase as we go up. So there are a lot less trees, and then there are a little bit more crickets, and there are a lot more of these spiders at the top. And then for the biomass pyramid, this one, in this case, it decreases as it goes up. And the biomass is the total mass of all individuals combined. If we were to measure the mass of all the trees in this food chain, we would have a very large number. But then as we measure the biomass of all the crickets, crickets have a very small mass to begin with, so the mass would be a lot smaller here. And for the last one, there's a much smaller mass than even the crickets at the third level here. That's all for today. However, as you'll see on your document, there is an exit activity, and I would like you to complete the quizzes on ecological pyramids until you've reached a score of 80% or more. And also, since we looked at the impact of different species' diets on food webs, food chains, different ecosystems, I would also like to take a look at how humans might impact these. So I left this question here for you. If every human on this earth was a vegetarian, how would this benefit the environment? If you want, you can also explain why you think it wouldn't benefit the environment. It's completely up to you, but just do a quick research and see what you find, and then we'll talk about it once we meet on the Google Meets. And for the second part, it's on bioaccumulation and biomagnification. And this YouTube video here is really clear and it explains it super well. So you'll take a look at that and you'll do the virtual lab here just so you can understand how it works. And finally, once you've done the lab, you'll take a look at this food web below and you'll just answer these questions. So what's the difference between bioaccumulation and biomagnification? Which plants and animals are more susceptible to problems from DDT? And what are some differences between the food chains of ospreys and the food chains of northern harriers? Okay, so that's all. Thank you for listening.